Greetings, you loyal Herle Burlyites here in Canada and around the pod world, which includes a burgeoning fan base for today anyway, in London, England. Double it up. Somebody in addition to Ralph will be listening today. But before we get into today's topic, I want to thank you all for the fantastic response to last week's Fresh Data on Trudeau and Poilievre pod with Keir and Ellenfitch. So many great comments on the socials about Kyla's insights, may be summed up best by this one from the esteemed Shay Green MD on the Apple Ratings and Reviews Industrial Complex. Dr. Green, whom I'm imagining is both a neurosurgeon and gastroenterologist, writes, and I quote, "Keir and Ellenfitch, this woman is the bomb. I love her." Thank you for that, Doctor. We concur on both the bomb and the adoration parts. So, a tough act to follow, but our guest today is a longtime friend of the pod who's absolutely up to the task. Andrew MacDougall is back for his third appearance here. Andrew is the former Director of Communications for Prime Minister Harper. Now he lives in London, where he's a director at Trafalgar Strategy and writes about politics and current affairs, appears frequently on television in all the right journalistic places. That includes his most recent piece in The Star on the snap soggy election call by UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. We're going to talk about what this election so far hasn't been enough about, the actual issues confronting the kingdom, and why that's the case. We'll also touch on some of his thoughts on the Canadian political scene and lots more. Andrew, thanks for doing this with us today. How are you?
Oh, great. Always a pleasure to be on with you, David.
Great. Hey, how long have you been in London now?
Coming up on 11 years, which I can hardly believe. 11 years, 2 kids, and a lifetime. It feels like I've been here.
Right. Do you like it?
Oh, God, how can you not love it? You know,
I don't know. I've never lived there.
Wow, look, what's the saying? If you're tired of London, you're tired of life. And that couldn't be true. And if you look at kind of the big cities around the world, London is blissfully tranquil compared to the major kind of street crime you hear in a lot of North American cities now. You don't see a lot of kind of open homelessness or kind of evidence of mental illness. And look, whatever cuisine, art, sport, interest you're into, you'll find it here. And that's not just the big kind of ones. It's every niche interest you could think of. It's just the most wonderful place.
So just spend a minute and compare it to Toronto.
Yeah, it is much more friendly in terms of London is a series of villages, where I find Toronto is more the core and the sprawl. And although you get quite a similar amount of diversity across the GTA, you don't have the cohesion, whether that's the ease of getting about. You don't have as much variety in major sporting franchise. For example, in London, you have 6 Premier League clubs alone, plus the lower division teams. So, you get that variety. And then, the way they design the city, every little borough has its own kind of major arts complex from back in the days when councils used to spend money on that. So you'll find these lovely Art Deco complexes built in the 20s and 30s kind of everywhere, in every corner, which I don't feel you get in North American cities, certainly, and probably not Toronto.
Right. Interesting. Cool. Okay. So there's an election on in the UK. It's been going on for about a week now. It's long been considered a lock for the Labour Party. This election, long been considered a lock for the Labour Party. Has anything happened in the first week to change that assumption?
No, not at all. And if you look at the polling, it is just awful for the incumbents, for Rishi Sunak and his Conservative Party. And as you noted, it's been about 20 points, give or take, for most of the past year. And the first YouGov poll here had a 28-point advantage for Labour. And that, David, if you look at the splits, if you look at the under 50s, it is now 53% Labour, 8% Tory. And so you're looking at a situation in a 650 MP parliament, the Tories going down to maybe 100, 120 on those numbers, which is, it's not 1993 Canada, but it is as kind of comprehensive a thwacking as you could give an incumbent government.
Well, okay. And why is that? Is it just 14 years? I mean, 14 years is a long time. So that could just be the answer. Or is it more than that?
I think it's a confluence of that and more. I think it's not only 14 years, which is a long time. It's that the last 3 or 4 have been tough by anyone's standards globally. And the last two have been particularly tough because of the self-inflicted wound that was Liz Truss, which we talked about before. And that was when the mountain became insurmountable for the Conservatives, in my view. Rishi Sunak came in, he steadied the ship, he stopped the bleeding, pick your metaphor. He kind of made everything sane again. But he's just now too far behind. And as you'll know, after 14 years, what can you credibly say to people about offering change? And typically you could do it if you had a new leader, but we had 3 prime ministers in a year. So that doesn't really hold water, and none chosen by the electorate.
So why is Sunak carrying 14 years? Why isn't he new and fresh?
Well, because he had to spend that critical early days capital of being a new leader and a prime minister bailing out the boat that Liz Truss flooded. And so that is a thankless task, and it is one that you just have to go in there and do, and you don't get credits for saying things aren't worse.
Right.
And he took his shot at putting through a few small tax cuts to what we call national insurance here. And that's just not a retail tax cut. It's not something that most people feel. It's not something what the government was counting on is that interest rates would be reduced, so people's mortgage payments would be less. But even then, I mortgaged at 1.1% and then had to remortgage at 5.19%. And I can tell you, that's a lot of angry people. And that's 200,000 voters a month are resetting up. Family households are resetting every month this year. So that's just, another cohort of people that will be very unhappy.
Right. So Sunak called a snap election that seemed almost so snap as to catch his own party by surprise. What's his plan here?
Well, yeah, and it's funny you say that because as we're wont to do in our line of work, we had a private dinner that night with a cabinet minister, which is one of Sunak's biggest backers. And, we all saw the flurry on social media and quickly texted him going, we understand if you can't kind of come now. But to his credit, he ended up coming. And in his view, and he wasn't one of the ones who knew, there was about 8 who knew ahead of the day. I mean, Lord Cameron was off in Albania. The defense secretary got told not to go to a NATO meeting. Like, this was just like total surprise. And what he said was essentially they'd had good inflation data. They could read the tea leaves and see that wasn't going to filter through into tax cuts. So going now versus going later wouldn't have a material difference. And they thought they could
interest rate cuts?
Get the advantage of not being afraid, stealing a march. And that's great to do that in theory. But when the first few days of the election are your own side going, we weren't prepared for this. I thought I had 4 months to look for a job. Somebody actually said that to a newspaper saying, I thought we were going in the autumn. I thought I would have to. So they're angry at him. And they still don't have, well, now it's probably changed, but they had 160 candidates that they were missing. They didn't even have names for 160 constituencies. Which is, sure, they're probably in places like downtown London where they don't have a chance. But it just, you do these things because you have an advantage. You don't do these things to then stumble out of the gate, fall on your face, get drenched in the rain, do a photo op where the Titanic was built, and a scrum on a plane with the exit sign over your shoulder, all in the first kind of 2 days. It's like somebody in his team hates him.
Yeah, it's the worst tour since Hudak 2014. What was his thinking? What was the moment of surprise he was hoping to capture? What was the point of this?
Well, yeah. And look, bullet in the head now, bullet in the head later, there's probably some degree of let's get this over with. And if you remember in the latter days of Gordon Brown, he was accused of squatting in 10 Downing Street. And of course, he'd bottled it by not calling the election sooner in 2007 after he was put in. And so I think all that psychology and, even some conservatives here are like, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. The school year in California starts in August. So kind of Rishi wanted his kids in school before he takes his tech job. That was the kind of chatter, seriously, from conservative MPs here. So I think, as it was explained to us by this cabinet minister, it was just literally, we didn't see runway later in the year to do things like a tax cut. Mortgage rates weren't going to come down. So we would just go through a summer of more migrants coming across the channel, interest rates maybe even, or inflation ticking back up. And then, where would we be? So I think, if you look at how they're doing the campaign, it's classic, save the furniture, save as many seats as you can so you can live to fight another day. And whether they did that in June or did that in October, November, probably doesn't matter.
And this inflation thing, I mean, I think that you're seeing this in the UK and you're going to see it in Canada too, which is there's no political payoff for the reduction in the inflation rate because the prices don't go down, right?
Yeah.
I mean, government can say, hey, inflation's down to 2%. And people say, well, nothing happened to the price of sliced ham. It's still too fucking expensive.
Yeah.
Right?
You're still bent over a barrel. And that, like, if you can show, if the Bank of England had cut interest rates and mortgages you would get at least a sense of relief that your monthly outgoings, but yeah, a slower rate of increase still means you're getting it. You're just getting it a little bit more gently than you were getting it before.
Right. So the Labour leader, what's his name?
Beige. He is just, if Sir Keir Starmer was a color, he would be beige.
He's a knight. What did he do to become a knight?
So he was the director of public prosecutions here before he got into elected politics. So his honor comes from that. And that
gets you the same thing John Lennon has?
Well, there are various gradations of this. He's not a baron or anything, but yeah, he is kind of forthright, upright public servant image, but he is kind of also displayed quite a bit of steel when he inherited, as you'll remember, a Labour Party that had been just kicked in 2019 because they had Jeremy Corbyn, who was never getting knighted for anything because he's a menace, an anti-Semite and a menace to all things that are right in this world. So he had to come in and do his own version of Sunak, if you think about it, and clean up that mess and kick out the anti-Semites and kick out the hard left. And so he spent the first year of his mandate doing that plumbing and has since kind of turned into somebody who is not afraid to take a bold position inside his party, even if he's been quite flexible in policy.
Healthcare and how, as a collective of 39 million people, we access it. I don't think I can come up with a subject that's more deeply embedded in the values of the country. Ask any Canadian. They'll give you an opinion. By the way, I have over the course of my 40 professional years as a researcher. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, doesn't just reflect those values or say the prudent things about healthcare because it shows up on a list of corporate talking points. They invest in it, substantially and continuously. The goal is simple: improve health outcomes. Their TELUS Health business unit has been a priority for years now. At home and abroad, it's grown to help almost 70 million people. We're all accessing so much more of our care online. TELUS Health Virtual Care is a big reason why, with about 5.6 million customers. TELUS Health for Good programs have helped over 1 million Canadians who otherwise wouldn't be able to access the care they need. 2 new mobile clinics were launched last year to help the underserved and homeless. Those clinics are now in 25 communities, treating 56,000 patients. TELUS Health MyCare offers free counseling to women who need mental health support. And their medical alert program gives low-income older Canadians access to a low-cost alert device at the push of a button. Those are just a few examples, Herle Burlyites, of the kinds of social purpose investments TELUS wants to keep making. Regulatory conditions play a big role in what they can get done. Right now, the government is laying the groundwork for a new wholesale regime. TELUS believes the best way forward is a tailored approach that considers not only regional differences, but also the companies who continue to invest in their services and the Canadians who so vitally need them. His bold decisions, though, they're mostly sealing off vulnerabilities that existed under Corbyn, correct? Like his plan to win appears to me just to be to get out of the way of the electorate taking their punishment on the Conservatives. He's not trying to shape this election in a mandate way.
No, not. So he had what he called his 5 missions that he was talking about for most of the year. And they were, motherhood and apple pie in terms of like make the NHS better, get economic growth. But yeah, to your point, that if anything specific has been in the shop window, the Tories haven't nicked it. They haven't stolen the idea, but they've spent the headroom that Labour was counting on. So they had a 28 billion pound green plan, for example, that they were going to do to get to net zero and all that. And then the Tories started backing away from their own net zero, and then started spending the money that was earmarked for it on other things. So that caught Labour out. So they've not put really anything much in the window since. They have a plan for what they call GB Energy, which will be a state-owned energy to try get investment in nuclear and things like that, where the state, they feel, has to spend to get capital following in after. But they haven't done much on the retail side yet. Rachel Reeves, the shadow chancellor of the Exchequer, has basically been running around for a week going, I'm not going to raise that tax or that tax or that tax or that tax. And the Tories going, you're lying, and that it's just this kind of, you suck, they suck more. Aren't you tired of this suckiness? Try us. We're beige, but we're not mental. It's literally, that's the level of discourse we've had for a week.
Right. So how is this Labour version, assuming they win, are they similar to the Blair-Brown Labour Party that we knew, or are they different?
Well, I think Sir Keir Starmer would like you to believe that he is the same as Blair in terms of outlook, more centrist than he is Corbyn, certainly, although he does describe himself as a socialist. But of course, the big difference between 1997...
You can win in the UK describing yourself as a socialist.
Well, yeah, we're about to test that proposition. But yeah, he does come out and say he's a socialist, social democrat. But he did say socialist.
That's different. That's different. Yeah, like New Democrats in Canada call themselves social democrats. They never call themselves socialists.
Yeah, but he has in this campaign called it, and nobody seems to mind. But the main difference in 97 is whereas Blair and Clinton were pure third way, keep Thatcher Reaganism on the economics, they had an economy that was booming, and so they could just open the taps on social spending. That won't be the case here. The country's broke. It has a major productivity problem, major economic growth problem. And these are the things that we desperately need to be hearing about in this election that we're really not. Because even now that Brexit's massively unpopular and the majority think that it was a mistake, Labour's not touched that. And the surest thing they could do to increase economic growth here is just to kind of take that plug that was pulled out of the wall called Europe and plug it back in.
So why isn't that the central issue in the campaign? Why isn't Brexit the number one issue in this election?
Well, I think, look, it's become the new third rail. Like you couldn't touch, for example, the NHS because it was more than just a program. It was an identity, and that's Brexit's the same. So, I think it will still. I mean, it feels like it's been so long ago, but it's really only, I guess, 8 years now. But even that feels a bit too soon to kind of reopen that. And I think if you look at from the Labour perspective of what
Sorry, can I just stop you? Am I right, though, that overwhelmingly the country has remorse about that decision?
Yes, they do. Yeah, that's what the polling shows. But, in terms of giving the Conservative Party a life, because you have to look at, so what the problem with the Conservatives is not only that they are massively unpopular, they now have Reform UK, which is the former Brexit, which is the former UKIP party. So Nigel Farage in all but name, because he's not on the ballot officially, but they now have an outrider to their right. And what Labour doesn't want to do is give the right a reason to coalesce in any way. And if they were going to pick that Brexit scab, I think that would be one thing that would kind of, if not recreate 2019, because you couldn't absent Boris Johnson, but it was that idea of getting Brexit done and having that undone would be the one thing that would gel them up to the point where Labour might not get a majority. They might.
So it's not going to come up in the campaign, but a Labour government will probably pursue repairing relations with Europe, right?
Yeah, and they will say that as much as on a program per program basis. And look, to be fair, Rishi Sunak has put water in his wine in terms of scientific funding, security and defense cooperation. Like there are ways you can work with Europe that are short of the threshold of reopening Brexit. And I think what you'll see is a Labour government reconnect the plumbing behind the scenes in anticipation that in the future they might want to maybe reconsider the question. So if there's anything kind of below the public's eye line that they can do, they'll do. Because if you talk to big business, small business, they are all just sick to death of the paperwork and the friction and the hassle. And while the major multinationals can work around it, the small to medium-sized enterprise, the kind of historic backbone of conservative support, those kind of entrepreneurs and strivers are the ones that get it in the neck.
Right. So the issue set, as I'm watching it, affordability, interest rates, immigration, seems very similar to a Canadian. Is it relatively the same kind of political environment we have here?
Yeah, and I think this is really one where the advanced Western economies, if you're an incumbent, you are facing a kind of very macro similar set of issues. And I think you're also limited in what you can propose as a solution because, either the fiscal situation is so bad or, more importantly, the pressures that now bear down on any one nation state are more than any one nation state can control or turn the tide on. These are global issues, global capital flows, global people flows, global climate issues. Like, these aren't things that you can resolve. Like Margaret Thatcher, love her or hate her, when she came in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, could bust the unions. She could renationalize industries. That was within her gift to do that. There is no thing like that. There's nothing like that after 40 years of pretty one-way globalization. The bond markets, as Liz Truss found out, or the major multinationals, they could just downplay arbitrage with all these countries. So it really does take coordination. And I think any incumbent, and Trudeau will certainly feel this whenever he calls the election, is yeah, A, we're tired of you. But B, there's really just no easy answer. And the other guys, the opposition, just have to go, look, you're tired of this. I know I'm tired of it. You're tired of it. Let's just turn the page. And that's why I say here, it's going to be a change election without much change. Once Labour comes in, they'd be new bodies and they won't be kind of idiots. And that's nice. But that's about it.
One area where I don't know, because you're going from right to left and we're going to go from left to right. But the way you're talking about and the way I'm reading about for instance, Labour's green plan that they've scrapped now, the steam in Canada seems to have gone out of the climate change fight a little bit. Has that happened in the UK as well?
Yeah, it has, massively so. And this is where the cost of living crisis that we've all been experiencing since COVID and since Russia barreled into Ukraine and put the world energy markets kind of on their heads, is that, the kind of demand from ordinary people for that is lessened because it's just the hierarchy of needs, right? You have to put food on your table. You have to pay your mortgage. It's a luxury concern. And you kind of hate to say that given the dire state of the climate, but it is a luxury concern. And, if you pick an example here where there was a big reversal from the government, they had this big plan to get people to install heat pumps here. And they were giving £7,500, £8,000 per unit subsidies. But these things still cost £13,000, £14,000. And most people don't have a spare £6,000 or £7,000 hanging around. And more to the point, with energy and gas prices being what they were, it costs more to run a heat pump than it does your own gas boiler. And then you add on top of that most Victorian homes, like the one I'm in, aren't properly insulated. And so you could pump all this nice heat and have it go right out the window. So that momentum has stopped. And the Conservatives saw that firsthand in the by-election for Boris Johnson's seat, where or Labour saw it, where a levy that Sadiq Khan, the London mayor, had proposed on driving was the main ballot issue. And people just didn't want to pay to drive into central London.
Safety is one of those subjects that tends not to excite, principally because success involves things not happening. But just about nothing is more important. Our sponsor, CN, runs a network that spans North America, from the east coast of Canada to the Pacific, and down the Mississippi to the Gulf Coast. Its tracks and trains run through thousands of communities, and the duty of rolling safely and smoothly through those cities and towns is absolute. Early in June, during Safety Week, special CN trains will make a series of whistle stops across the railway's network. Teams of safety experts will meet local leaders, talk safety, celebrate employees who have logged 30 injury-free years, recognize heroic acts, and simply and plainly explain how to prevent injuries, accidents, and disasters. Hint, if you see a train coming, for heaven's sake, stay off the tracks. And CN is putting serious muscle into disaster relief. Earlier this month, the railway announced a pledge of $10 million over 10 years across its network. Climate change has brought increasingly extreme weather in recent years. Wildfire season is well underway. Count on seeing forest fire smoke again over major cities this year. So apart from its extensive efforts to prevent and contain fires, and I'll have more on that as the summer progresses, the railway is setting aside money for emergency response, community rebuilding, and infrastructure rehabilitation. The world is changing, folks. We have to adapt. That will cost money, and CN is stepping up.
So, in addition to things like the heat pump, you did see a big by-election here not that long ago when Boris Johnson resigned and they were running in West London out near Heathrow Airport. It was his constituency. And the main voting issue there wasn't a national concern. It was a local issue called the ULEZ. And that was a levy that Sadiq Khan had put on cars. So every time you kind of drove into the ULEZ zone, you had to shell out £13.
Right.
And that went really badly for the Labour candidate there. And the Tories were able to hang on to that seat by the skin of their teeth, largely on the back of that issue. And then off the back of that, the government kind of scrapped a lot of its more retail impacting stuff. So like the deadline to buy electronic vehicles was pushed back, electric vehicles, sorry, was pushed back 5 years. And so that's when you really started to see that. But yeah, I think writ large, the world is a lot less exercised about climate issues because they have other more serious and proximate concerns, namely pocketbook concerns.
It's very difficult for the people that know a lot about climate change to accept this.
Yeah, I mean, look, politics is it is where principle meets. It's the art of the possible, right? And people have been in this game know that you kind of have to push when the doors open. It takes a lot to shift a nation on an issue, and often the tide just becomes too strong going the other way, and you gotta ride it out to come back in at some point. And I think Justin Trudeau's getting this all over the place on carbon tax, and people wondering, is this still tenable? And then you get down to the point where this is so much political capital in here. This is my issue. This is where I've showed leadership and courage. If I back away from that, what's the point of me? But when voters are going, well, the point is I'm broke. That is the very definition of a rock and a hard place.
Right. In terms of affordability, have either of the parties come up with anything in this campaign as a promise that might be of interest to Canadian parties? Is there an idea out there that's interesting?
No, we're in an idea-free zone. Sadly, we are. We have yet to hear them. And look, maybe that's just the natural fact that nobody was expecting this to happen, and everybody's getting their boots on still, or getting their skates laced up, and trying to figure out what's going on. But there's been nothing on the retail front. It's been no, we won't do that, or that. Don't worry, don't worry the horses kind of thing. And the energy regulator here, they put a price cap on energy prices. That's come down. So that will ease pressures, but that's not within the government's control. But there's been, the Tories know, and look, the fiscal position here is so bad, and taxes are already so high that, and this is where Liz Truss just kind of spooked everyone, and that she came in promising a whole bunch of stuff that she couldn't fund, and the world did not look kindly on that. So everybody's kind of accepting that we're skint, and that the offer will have to be something else, namely, we're not the current people in there that you hate.
Right. The Prime Minister came up with an idea in the first week of compulsory national service for every young person in England. Quickly got turned into military, I think, by the opposition, but I don't know that that's what he was talking about necessarily. Various types of service. I'll just... it was widely derided in the circles I saw as a stupid political move. And maybe it is a stupid political move. But, I once was at a briefing session in Israel on how their economy was doing so well, and this whole startup nation thing and where that all came from. And I was in a room with these people, and they put up all kinds of PowerPoint slides about, how they developed an ecosystem between universities and business and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of it, I said, every country could put up slides like that. What is the real difference here? And they said, compulsory military service is the real difference. that the kids are more mature, they're more equipped to problem solve, they're more independent and self-sufficient. They're just different than kids in other countries having come out of that. So it doesn't sound to me necessarily like a crazy idea. Where do you stand on?
I think, David, this is one that anybody who's tried to do something difficult in politics, that you have to till the earth. You have to prepare the ground for something like this, right? You have to make the case. And this is one, I think, where the tide analogy I used works very differently in Israel. That everyone who lives in Israel senses the existential threat and the cohesion that produces. Over here in the babied West, where we've been indulged and had our bellies rubbed as young people for so long, the idea that I have to do anything I don't want is just, it's a bit of a learning curve. And I think it's one of these things that I support, and I would love countries like Canada and the United Kingdom to do compulsory military service, because it would whip a lot of us candy asses into shape, both physically, mentally, and give you that esprit de corps and that sense of teamwork and discipline that you get. I think outside of really,
I'm far more open
sports
to this idea now than I was when I was 18.
Yeah, and I think, but I think this is where you have to realize, like, the kind of one of the meta issues in politics, in my mind, is identity and positive expressions of that. And if you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And I think, when Justin Trudeau and politicians like him come and say, like, Canada's basically a big hotel, the post-national state, like, what does that mean? And I think that's where Quebecers look and go, are you guys, tu malade? What's happening? And
Right.
I think we give all of that away at our peril, and we have to be about something. And it doesn't have to be martial. It doesn't have to be, but you have to. And look, like Trudeau, when he was with Timovic, that was the kind of similar thinking, is how can I connect Canadians from different geographies and give them a better sense of nation and place? And I think we need to do that, to feel that. But you have to get people ready for it. And it has to happen at the right time, not off the back of a cocktail napkin day 3 into a campaign that nobody was expecting. And I think had they spent the summer preparing for this and then done a fall campaign, it might have been different.
I was only half joking about my different perspective based on age. Is this a deliberate strategy to attract older people for the Conservatives? Have they written off the young? You gave some terrible numbers, polling numbers about their status with young people. So have they just said, fuck those people? We're going to get every old person we can.
Yeah, that is absolutely, like, furniture saving 101 is get the oldies for the Tories. And look, I expect the next policy will be like mandatory blood donations from young to old. It will be like they will probably stop at nothing. And if you look, they have something called the triple lock on pensions here, where they basically can't ever go down. And they basically quadruple lock that in the first week of the campaign. So that shows you, like, entirely where their focus is. And look, if you're trying to make sure that your rump is as substantial as a rump can be, you probably have to target the only people that still kind of like you.
Right.
But that just crashes hard against the reality of if you look at the intergenerational transfer of wealth that's going to happen as the boomers shuffle off. Like, these are issues Western economies, when our demographic situation is so poor, and native births are so low, and we're making these differences up through immigration, which can be a wonderful thing and is the right thing to do, but sets a whole other series of public policy problems for you, and makes that cohesion piece that we were just speaking about that much more difficult as well. So you kind of have to, pick your poison. And so Sunak, I think he's doing the right thing. He knows he's not going to win. He can't say that, but everybody knows it. So yeah, keep the people who still like you happy, turn them out, preserve 100, 150 MPs, and then try to rebuild.
Right. What role is foreign policy playing in this election? The UK has been, to my eye, a very upfront and strong supporter of Ukraine from the beginning of the war. And I noticed that Labour has a candidate controversy now over linked to the war against Hamas and Gaza. That there's and I presume this is about the new leader's determination to stamp out any notion of anti-Semitism in the party. But there's a candidate who's a prominent and person of color who's maybe disallowed. So are these things bubbling to the surface in this election?
I think yes for Labour, less so for the Conservatives. And on Ukraine, there is not There is not a fraction of difference between the two parties. Keir Starmer, whether it's NATO, whether it's the nuclear deterrent here in the form of the Trident submarine program, rock-ribbed support. It's on Israel and Gaza, as Joe Biden's experiencing the state, is his voter coalition is split on this issue. And historically, the Jewish population in the UK could count on Labour. They went through a few years where they manifestly could not. And Keir Starmer put a lot of capital into getting them back and making them feel safe. And, that's, I was saying at the start of the podcast how London feels like a pretty safe place. I would hesitate to ascribe that view to somebody who's Jewish, who's living here, because there's been a lot of big street protests here, a lot of anger, similar to Canada, a lot of public hatred, and a lot of idiots just don't know what they're saying when they say from the river to the sea and all that stuff. But it is an uncomfortable place, and that's more uncomfortable on the left. So yes, there are some candidates here that would love the UK government to take a different line on Israel. And Keir Starmer has tried to stay on the fence as long as he's could about that, and probably would rather have this all come to a conclusion in one way or the other before a campaign, and is now just going to try to not have to talk about this issue for as much as he can. So every time there's a misstep or an accident in Rafah or what have you, he will feel pain from some of his candidates and from some of his support.
But what is the electoral impact? Like, in the sense that, Trudeau, a lot of people think Trudeau has not been strong enough supporter of Israel, but his support has been strong enough clearly to cost him a lot of votes in the Muslim community, according to polling that we've seen. And the Biden campaign is worried they could lose to Trump because young people either don't show up or they show up and vote for somebody else over this issue in places like Michigan, university towns, etc. So is this something that could impact negatively on Labour's march to victory?
Not on the march to victory, but on the margin. So if you look at Labour and what they'll need to do to get a sizable working majority, there are a couple of areas that stand out. Scotland is one. They have to kind of recolonize Scotland because they went down to one MP there, and they should be able to do that. They have to retake what Boris Johnson won in the north of England, the so-called red wall seats. They look well positioned to do that. In certain communities and constituencies, if you think around the rings of Manchester or around Leeds and places like Bradford, or in East London, if you look at Tower Hamlets, there are some constituencies that are majority Muslim by a significant percentage. And if you look at this guy named George Galloway, who people have probably heard of, who won a recent by-election in Rochdale, and that was a single issue, Israel-Gaza, and Labour did pay the price there. But that's a by-election. It's a bit different. I think the overall mood of get the Tories out is strong enough that it might just be, instead of winning by a comfortable margin or a massive margin, Labour wins by 5% instead of 7% or 10%. But I don't think it will outright tip too many seats, either independent or Green, because you see some of these people are running under either an independent banner or the Green Party candidate in some of these constituencies.
Is there a party that's running against Israel right now in the election?
No, not at all. Not overtly.
Lib Dems are not there. Nobody's even touching them.
No, Lib Dems will. Everybody kind of says like, we want a ceasefire now, but like the wax is in Netanyahu's ears. Like the Americans are going like, yeah, don't do that, and he's still doing it. So like, why anybody thinks anyone will give a fuck about what anyone in the UK says, and that includes Lord Cameron and Rishi Sunak now, that you're dreaming in Technicolor, and it might be that one day they will, but it doesn't seem to be that way now.
Okay. I noticed that Labour is proposing to raise defense spending to 2.5% of GDP. Is that correct?
Well, so Rishi Sunak just, not a month ago or a couple of weeks before the campaign, put that pledge in the window. So he'd been getting stick from his own side. The former defense secretary, Ben Wallace here, had been kind of wanted to get it to 3%. And then he announced he was standing down a few months ago, and Grant Shapps came in, and they ended up getting 2.5%. And Labour was slow to say that they would match that. They said they would get to it, but they'd have to see the finances. But
why would they want to? Like in Canada, you'd run against that.
Yeah,
right?
No, and I think But a lot of that spending, David, here is tied up in the nuclear deterrent and the kind of renewal of the nuclear submarine fleet, which is being done in a BAE Systems facility in northwest England in a very deprived part called Barrow-in-Furness. And that's like one of these things where it's a weird local issue, but it's a big bulk of the defense spending as well. And it's not like, they're going to be able to rekit or the military numbers are still way down here. They're understaffed. There's really no plan to get military numbers up to where they need to be to run all the kit that they currently have. So it's kind of a bit of a phony debate. But yeah, to your point, he's not running away from it. And this is, again, one of those tests that voters, what they didn't like about Jeremy Corbyn was, yes, that he was an anti-Semite, but also they didn't appear to love his country. And that he was always on the other side. He was pro-IRA. He was pro-Hamas. And Starmer can't have any daylight there either. So I don't think he wants to do that thing where I'm rock-ribbed on these things, but on spending, he knows there's got to be some there on the spending bit if people are going to believe that he's not Jeremy Corbyn, that he can be trusted with the defense of the realm.
But why is the UK different than Canada on defense spending? Like, if Poilievre were to say now that he would increase Canadian defense spending to 2.5%, Trudeau's back in the game.
I mean, look, it's the luxury of sitting on top of your big brother, right? And Canada's been a freeloader on defense under various governments, including the one I served, because you don't have to. And the world was a nice, genteel place. So I think what's happened here in Europe anyway is the threat of the last 2 years feels very real here in a way that I think it's still a bit distant in Canada.
Completely.
Because you have the protection of the oceans and but Russian revanchism and the fact of if NATO is going to be called upon and the Baltics and Georgia and all, like, we see danger signs everywhere. So I think that hits a bit closer to home in the UK. And then I think they would have to think about what's Britain's role post-Brexit. And I think Starmer sees this as a way also of kind of having his bona fides there as well, going like, we are still an international kind of committed alliance partner, and we're not isolationist, and we'll do our duty like we're doing on Ukraine. We will do that for NATO. So I think you have to spend there, and Canada's just a lucky place that it can fuck around and not get found out.
Do you think that Canada? I mean, we're starting to hear a lot of noise about the 2% target. And do you think that Canada may ultimately pay a price for its refusal to fund defense?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think it's paying already in the sense that I don't think people care to check in on whether we're going to do something about something. When Iran lobbed all those missiles, it's not like anybody's first call was to Canada and going like, okay, can you guys help us out here with like a few planes? It was the Brits, it was the Americans. And like some people were just, yeah, we have assets in the region. Like, here, we'll do this, we'll do that work. So I think we're already an afterthought in a lot of stuff. And I think we don't have Afghanistan now is a place where we could say, look, we've at least chipped in there and done our bit, punched above our weight, blood and treasure, all that. There's none of that anymore. And even in the days of ISIL and ISIS and Trudeau, kind of mocked Harper for kind of whipping his F-16s out kind of thing. And like, we're even 10 years beyond that now. And I think people just know if they call Canada, like, what could you credibly get? Like, what are the chances a Sea King could strategically fall out of the sky at the right place to smash something useful on the ground, right? I mean, that's kind of what you're talking about. And I hate to say it because the Canadian military, the soldiers that do deploy are still amongst the world's best. They are trained well. They do know they just have been ill-served by a number of masters who haven't given them the kit. And would it be nice if Canada could figure out its procurement mess and just like, God, for God's sake, buy what the Americans buy. Just tack a couple onto their order and call it a day and forget about this need to kind of feather nests in Canada. Just get the kit.
Right. It seems so frustrating. Hey, can we switch to Canada for a minute?
Yeah, you bet.
What similarities do you see between Trudeau's situation and Sunak's situation?
I think the penalty of incumbency Trudeau's not been he's been the only leader for 9 years, so he wears a lot. But the double whammy of COVID and Ukraine and Russia, I think, is just it's been really bad. And I think, Britain's policy choices in response to that were bad in a sense, in that personal behavior, Boris Johnson's Partygate, not handling COVID spending, a lot of fraud, that kind of stuff, anger about lockdown within his constituency. I think these are tough things for any incumbent. And, you just have to look at the amount that Canada spends now. The public service is up 40% in size. The people who talk about the power of government and loving government turn out to actually not be that good at doing government. And I think, where there's a similar feeling is that nothing works the way it used to or the way it should. And there's a lot of kind of cynicism and despair when people look at government and just think like it's all fucked, and I think there's that. And this is easier for an opposition to lean into that and point the finger. It's harder for the incumbent, especially one that's been around, to do. And like, what will Justin Trudeau say different to what he's done before? And you see the way the Liberals kind of, it's abortion this and panic button that, and people just think that doesn't fix what's wrong in their lives. So if you're in government, use the power of government and do something like build some homes, and that's what Rishi Sunak should have done. Instead of now having to fight to save the old people, you should have spent the last year of his mandate going, I'm going to build everywhere, especially in the big cities that vote Labour. I'm going to build there. I'm going to build them high. I'm going to build them cheap. I'm going to build them everywhere. And that at least would have given young people going, somebody hears me. Like, please, thank you. Yes, I won't vote for you this time, but maybe in 10 years when I'm on the housing ladder because somebody built something that I could afford, maybe I'll give you a look in. And Justin Trudeau needs to start looking for things like that. I think he styles himself as somebody who will make that principled decision, whether it's carbon tax or like do it on housing, like break every rule that you have to break to get as many starts as you have to get, and just show people that even if it's too late, that you've heard them. And that will actually help Canada, because the days of immigrants coming to Canada and wanting to live anywhere other than Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary, like they're over. Like you can't take 1 million Ukrainians anymore and give them the prairies and go, looks like Ukraine. Like, like knock yourselves out. That's just done.
So, Mark Carney was a pretty high-profile guy when he was the Bank of England governor. Much more profile than he got in Canada when he was Bank of Canada governor. I mean, over in England, if he went to the Glastonbury Festival, it was news and in the papers. So, watching him in that context, what do you think of him as a potential politician?
Yeah, I think it's like it feels Ignatieff 2.0 to me. And that's not like Mark Carney. You cannot listen to the man or meet him and not be impressed by his intellect, he's a smart man. And this is the kind of person you would think you would want to come into politics. But he's also, if you kind of look at the people Poilievre's getting excited now, he's kind of the bogeyman for everything that's wrong in their lives. Goldman Sachs banker, architect of cheap money, of asset inflation, post-economic crisis. These might have all been the right calls at the time, but the payments come due. And I think Pierre Poilievre would lick his lips and just like, he is like the alpha of everything, the absolute symbol of everything that's wrong in the global economy right now. And he would have that problem of incumbency, of having to say, look, everything I've advocated for in my professional career, that's now killing you financially. Look, I know what to do about that. And I think, but let's see if he goes for it. But I don't think it's a given that people are waiting for God to kind of come down from on high and save the world. They're looking for people that understand the issue that they're facing. And I'm not sure he does. Well, I'm sure he does intellectually, but I'm not sure he can tip or be an emblem for that.
How did he do when he waded into the Brexit debate?
Yeah, I mean, not well.
Not well? Why? Tell me about that.
Well, I think it kind of, and that's not to say the policy actions from the Bank of England were wrong post-Brexit, but he, in the bank, were quite punchy, and David Cameron, George Osborne were quite punchy about all the horrors that would befall the United Kingdom. And I think their mistake was to assume that it would be like a balloon being popped. Instead, Brexit's been like the air just slowly seeping out of a balloon. And I think this idea of catastrophe and that just seemed haughty and I think more unaware of what life is like outside of places like London or downtown Toronto. I think, if you look again at meta issues in Western politics, I think urban versus rural or left behind areas versus, like, if you're have a degree from a university and you're in a service profession living in a place like Toronto or London, the world's still your oyster. You can still afford the horrendous property prices. But if you're the immigrant family coming to that place, the days of you opening the pizza restaurant in Scarborough and putting your entire family through university, like, those days are gone. And I think whenever he opens his mouth, it's just a reminder of that. But he was, the right-wing tabloid press, as you would expect, like, hated him because he was a doomster and a gloomster, to use Boris Johnson's phrase. He was a guy who would talk down Britain. But he wasn't wrong on the economics. I think he was just wrong in the tone and in the rate that things would go badly. And I think people kind of give him a kicking for that.
Okay, interesting. One of the things that got conservatives excited in Canada was the Boris Johnson offensive among working class Britons, and how Boris Johnson put together a coalition that won a bunch of ridings that conservatives don't normally win, based on support from people they don't normally get support from. And we've seen that approach replicated by, say, the Doug Ford conservatives in Ontario, and to some extent by the Poilievre conservatives who voted against anti-scab legislation the other day, who voted for anti-scab legislation the other day. So obviously that has cracked for the UK conservatives. What is their standing with the working class right now?
Yeah, and I think this is very much the battle for the soul of the party is the 2019 election. I think people overhyped what Boris Johnson brought to that and undersold what Jeremy Corbyn brought to that. And I think if you look at people who are down the socioeconomic ladder or working class and living in left behind former industrial areas, they are still very proud of their place and their country. And so that social conservative, in the sense of cultural,
they'll still fight for their island, whatever the cost may be.
Well, yeah, and I think they lent Boris Johnson their vote, particularly on Brexit, and that was a story of slow erosion of Labour support. Labour took Scotland and the north of England for granted. They used to be their constituency when it was miners and industrial, like steelworks. And the party, as the left has, I think, writ large, gone from working class unionized workforces to urban, university educated, that kind of, the public sector union type, the champagne socialist, as opposed to the kind of dirt under my fingernails kind of socialist. And I think it just mystifies me that the left everywhere, and the left in Canada, like, why Jagmeet Singh does not realize that Pierre Poilievre is like taking all those broadbent voters and sticking them in his coalition. And meanwhile, he's there holding Justin Trudeau's jockstrap for a little bit of extra dental care. It is like abnegation of duty. Like, he is just like, this is his moment. Like, this is the moment. If they just like, Tom Mulcair might have gone too early, but this is the time to consolidate the left and kick the Liberals out and be the real party of the working class and left-leaning Canadians, and they're just fucked it every way. And it's, like, somebody on the right side of the spectrum is great to see, but what, and I think this is what, like, left has to get off identity. That like, speaking to the kind of hierarchy of concerns, like, you have to go back to class and pocketbook, and because right now the kind of asset holding class is making out like bandits. And the big corporates, the big tech companies, the big telcos, like, they are just creaming it, and we're all paying more for it. And somebody ought to kind of take that up and do something about it, not moan about my lived experience is not as great as your lived experience. You can't understand what I've been through. Like, what, we don't have empathy anymore? Like, we should empathize based on opportunity and make sure everybody's doing as much as they can. And we'll see if that shifts in Canada. I don't think Trudeau can do that anymore because he's just a known quantity.
the economic left, as opposed to the identity left, the economic left is voting for Poilievre.
Yeah.
And it's, insane to watch both the Liberals and the NDP just watch that happen and vacate that territory.
They don't live in an information bubble or economy that lets them hear too much of that. And then that's the kind of other issue that we haven't talked about is it's just hard to get a representative sample now of what's going on. There's no common canvas. You used to have these election debates and be able to follow them because it was kind of on a few tableaus that you could all check in on.
Yep.
Those days are gone too. And it's weird that some person you've never heard of on TikTok probably has more influence than the Toronto Star. And maybe that's the way it should be, but it's just something that politicos like to think that they have an understanding of.
What it means is there's not one campaign going on anymore. No. There's millions of campaigns going on. Right?
Yeah. No,
and
what goes around WhatsApp groups in some communities is more important than what's on the 6 o'clock news, or often 100% more important. It's friends, relatives, and neighbors, the friends on steroids, and there's no input, and it's hard to understand the output, and everybody's just kind of fumbling around in the dark going, oh, look, the leader still goes out 2 times a day and says stuff, and then it's just like a fart in a hurricane, right? Like, who knows what happens after that?
Right. And the net effect of it is that everybody knows that Trudeau's bad, but everybody would disagree on why. Everybody would have different reasons about why, right?
Yeah, and that's why, Keir Starmer's just sitting and going, change, 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 change. Have I said change, 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 change? Like, keep it simple, stupid has always been the mantra, but we're not even down to 3-word slogans now anymore. We all have the attention spans of goldfish, and we're drowning in, how do you pay attention to politics when you have all of recorded music and film at your disposal on a smartphone that follows you around? You can't, we're all vying for the same finite amount of attention. And the tech companies, guess what? Are better at monopolizing it than any political party or news organization.
Yeah, I can't follow the election this afternoon. I've got to check out this album, Blonde. But anyway.
Number 5 all time.
Number 5 all time. I want to end by asking you a bit of a silly question, but it isn't really silly. I'm kind of obsessed with it. And I know that you're not an expert, but I'm interested in every smart person's point of view. Trump got convicted yesterday on 34 counts. 12 jurors agreed unanimously. Is this going to make a difference?
Yeah, I kind of flop between extreme cynicism on this. And my money, just so I put my money's been on Trump getting inaugurated from jail for a while now. So I feel well positioned now to have that. And I think it's kind of, I haven't looked, but I bet you donations to Republicans is just shot through the roof since yesterday. And, the people that support him a lot. And I think it matters less his legal standing than what Joe Biden can say to Hispanics and Blacks to get them back in his coalition to the degree that they were even under Hillary Clinton. Because that's the underreported story of 2020 is Trump overperforming his 2016, and he's above that still in those communities. And that's where I think getting back to that identity versus economic left, I think that will matter more than Donald Trump being a felon. Although it's nice to hear those words, he said it himself, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and people still, I think that will now be tested. And I think if people are expecting this to kill him dead in his tracks, sorry, it's harder than that. He's the symptom. He's not the disease.
So you're saying that the victory path for Biden is not in suppressing the Trump vote. It is in maximizing the Biden turnout.
I think so. And I think Roe v. Wade does that in spades for a certain constituency, women,
right.
The white kind of middle class, upper class. I think that's a go. Lower down, I don't think, or in different communities, I don't think that matters. So I think that's the bigger problem for them. Right. And look, in as much as I think there is a floating voter who could vote for Trump and probably doesn't like that he's a felon, I think this might push a couple of them out, but I don't think there's a whole bunch of Republicans that were sitting there going, I just need to see if he's a convicted felon before I decide on this guy.
No, it's all so baked in, right? Is there any level of bad behavior that isn't already baked into the Trump assessment? My God, could he do anything to surprise anybody anymore?
And would anybody believe it if somebody, if the Georgia case were to somehow come and it was kind of, or the presidential immunity, people would still like, this is we're in this fractured information economy now. It doesn't matter what I think or you think. There is no we think anymore. And, and he is just able to lean into that in a way that no other politician can, because he's a man without shame, meeting an information economy with none either.
Right.
And while there's like a Rishi Sunak can try to do that and say, I'm going to stop the boats, and everybody goes, fuck off. You're a spreadsheet guy. Like, I know you don't believe that. Boris Johnson could do that a bit, but Trump is the master. And I don't think like Poilievre on his best day isn't that shameless, although he is quite good at tickling algorithms as well.
The demise of shame. Do you look back on your career in government and think of things you thought you had to backtrack on or apologize for that you now realize you probably didn't?
No, yeah. And look, this is one where even in the work I do now, it feels uncomfortable, like I had this situation where I had Kevin Spacey's agent on the phone a little while ago, and I'm like, I don't think I could. I hear what you want to do. I don't think I could, and so I like to think that I'm not going to surrender that. But absolutely, God, the things I used to worry about, the parliamentary press gallery getting upset about if we did it, now it's like, fuck them all. It's like, it is absolutely, and that we can't live that way. I hate it. Like, shame is such an important thing. You have to stop ourselves. We just don't go there. And Trump shouldn't come out going, everything's against me. It's all fucked. It's all a conspiracy. That just is battery acid on a democracy. And you have to, the systems are there. The processes are there. Like, the checks and balances are there. And if they check you out, you have to accept it.
People's belief in all those systems, not nearly as deep as we once thought.
No, if it was ever there at all, right? All it takes is somebody to test that convention. And then we see that it's really not as robust. It's a convention. It's not a set of hard and fast rules.
Right. And it's really a convention among a bunch of elites, not really a convention that filtered down to the citizenry of the country. You're
sounding like Pierre Poilievre, David.
Well, that's probably time for me to sign off then. Listen, thanks. This has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Great. All right, I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail, and all you Herle Burlyites for watching or listening to this show. Thanks very much, and come back next week for more of the Herle Burly. We'll see you then. Meantime, take care of yourselves. Herle